I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome to the show. Thank you. I'm clapping for you. Thank you so much. Yes. Keep clapping. Clap if you believe. How would we know you believe if you didn't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. This is a Muddied Waters Media production. Check us out on Facebook. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out on the Instagram. Check us out on SoundCloud. Check us out on iTunes. Check us out on muddiedwatersoffreedom.com. Check us out on a whole bunch of other sites I can't even remember right now. Muddied Waters Media, taking over the world. Check us out. The intro and outro music that I use on this and every episode of My Fellow Americans is from the wonderful and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That's Jodavi. Check him out on Facebook. Go to his Bandcamp. Buy all of his music. It's like $11, $10. Buy all of his music. You'll be so happy. Joe Davi. As always, shout out to Tehran Turks, his mom and him. Guys, I am really excited to have my next guest. I've actually been excited to have her on since I booked her a few weeks ago. She is an internet sensation. Her memes and her videos are incredibly popular all over the internet. She is the anarcho-capitalist superstar that we all wish that we could be. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to My Fellow Americans, the Philosopher. Thank you so much for joining my show today.
No problem, Spike. Thanks for having me.
And I'm going to spare us all some embarrassment because just before I started this episode, I discovered that it's actually pronounced pho. So I was going to be calling you the Pholosopher until you had until you actually corrected me. So I'm glad for both of us that I figured that out right beforehand.
Cool. Yeah.
So for those who are watching, be sure to comment with any questions or thoughts that you have for me or my guest, the Philosopher, and we'll let you know if you're right or wrong. So I was, and just purely out of curiosity, what was behind your decision to call yourself the Philosopher and kind of use a pseudonym as opposed to your name?
Well, it's more for one reason is like for privacy.
Right.
But another is I liked having the idea of like a pseudonym beyond just my name that represented what I'm about.
Right.
So, I mean, the main thing about my whole page is philosophy.
Right.
Like, that's my focus. And I just so happen to really love pho. And so I was like, oh, well, it fits in there. And yeah. So
That's
that
cool.
was, my idea for that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's as soon as when I would tell people that you were going to be my guest, they knew who you were immediately. So it was a very
Oh,
catchy
that's
name to get.
cool.
Now, do you prefer to be called the anarcho-capitalist, voluntaryist? Do you really have a preference there?
Yeah, I go by ANCAP or voluntarist, anarchist too. Sometimes I
Right.
say libertarian. Um,
They're all, none of those are mutually exclusive, but I was just curious. I know some people are very, like, they prefer one term over the other. Now, how would you
yeah.
say you got to the beliefs you have now? Was it sort of an aha moment, or would you say it was
Mm.
sort of an evolution over time of your beliefs?
Oh, I would say it was an aha moment.
Mm,
Um, so the story that I have that took me to becoming an anarchist was I started listening to Stefan Molyneux's Free Domain Radio show.
oh, okay.
And on that show, I first got really interested in his work because he would have a lot of guests on that would, calling in asking about family problems or relationship issues.
Right.
And, that pulled me in because I was experiencing my own issues with family and friends and trying to understand like why I felt so sad or angry. And it was really like therapeutic to listen to the other people's like experiences
Right.
and their struggles as well as they try to understand the truth of their relationships and the
Mm,
reality of the childhoods that they experienced. So that's what drew me in first. And in all his Colin shows, he seeds in the principles um, of voluntarism,
right.
essentially.
Right.
Um, and so I became an anarchist after realizing the nature of the state. Like once I realized that taxation was theft um, and the state is predicated on coercion, I
Right.
was immediately an anarchist. So it was like that aha moment. Um, but I still had lingering, confusion and question about like, well, who's gonna defend us if there's no state? And like,
Right.
but
Right.
in the end, I was still like an anarchist for ethical reasons.
Right. So, and it
Yeah.
just over time, kind of disabusing yourself of all of your conditioning of, well, it's a bad thing, but we might need the state for, like you said, common defense, or a lot of people. I don't know how people get hung up on roads. To me, that seems like that was I think even before I was an anarchist, I'm like, someone else could deal with the roads, but people
I
have their
can
various.
understand it. Just because, like in public school, I don't know. Did you go to public school
I was
growing
off
up?
and on. I was partially homeschooled and
Oh,
then
okay.
partially public school. So I got a taste of both. So yeah.
I see. I was there, yeah, the whole time.
Okay.
Like, there's a lot of propaganda, especially in elementary school. There's pictures of governments and roads and police and firefighters.
Right,
Like, I
right, right.
remember that in like first, second, third grade, especially.
Right,
It
right,
was
right.
like, say hi to Smokey the Bear or whatever. And it's like, he works with the local law enforcement, keeps everyone safe, keeps capitalists in check. Like,
Right,
I
right, right.
remember that whole narrative.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, most people grew up with that who went through the public school system. So they're
Right,
they're just inundated with those images,
right.
and it's probably not even very conscious that they pick it up. Like I didn't consciously go, okay, I see a picture of the roads. That must mean this. I just like took it in subconsciously, and I think most
Right.
people do that too. So,
Right. You weren't like, oh, government must be good. I'm looking at, but it's just such a kind of subtle, insipid thing that you're not even realizing what's happening. And it's as simple as, like, I remember even as a kid being told, if you get lost, find a police officer, like, because they'll
yeah, same
protect
here.
you. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those funny things where it's like you don't realize just. And I don't think the people that are doing it realize that they're actually conditioning you to accept the brutal police state. But it's like, that's the first step, that, if nothing else, you can trust a cop that's a total stranger. So
hmm
that's funny. But you
Yeah.
mentioned it's interesting. Stefan Molyneux's video, The Story of Your
I like,
Enslavement.
sorry, side thing. I like how you say his name properly.
Oh, yeah, some
I
people
always say
butcher it.
Stefan. Yeah, I do too. I'm like Stefan Molyneux. Like I don't
Stefan
know.
Molyneux, right? That's it. Yeah. But The Story of Your Enslavement. I don't know if you've seen that. That's kind of his
Mhm. It's like the number one.
Yeah, it's sort of like if no one even knows who we're talking about, they've probably even still seen that. Watching
That's
that,
great.
I already would say I was probably an anarchist before that.
Mhm.
Watching that actually, it was more of an us versus them type of thing. Like, well, we don't need the government, but watching that really helped me to realize like the actual nature of the state and our relation to them, that we're really like cattle in a tax farm. This is not,
Yeah.
like they truly see us as like a farm, and which helped me reconcile, well, if they're so oppressive to us, why do they allow us certain liberties and freedoms? Why do they allow us to? And they said for the same reason that they let cows walk around on the farm, because it's a better yield from what their basically their crop is, which is us.
Yeah.
So that really helped. I'm curious to ask you though. It's been difficult the last couple of years watching Stefan, where he has, I mean, he still considers himself an anarchist, but in my mind,
Yeah.
he's accepted a lot of things like government restriction of immigration and government trade protectionism, and doesn't seem to ever really have any
And
criticism.
stop and frisk.
Yeah, stop and frisk.
One time on a show, yeah, I was like so surprised. Yeah, and he said him and his co or operations manager Mike both said, yeah, it worked in New York. I'm like, first of all, it did not work.
It didn't work.
It was like it was like 5 or 10%, something really small percentage of people who were actually stopped had guns, which
Right.
by the way, even if it was like 80%, that doesn't say they're a criminal.
Right,
But
doesn't say they're criminal. Right.
yeah. So even aside from that being wrong, it's just the ethical part. I was so surprised. I was like, what? Yeah.
And he still calls himself like, he hasn't said I'm no longer an, because I mean there are plenty of what's his name, Cantwell, who's pretty much says now I'm no longer an anarcho-capitalist. I'm basically a fascist or whatever he calls, radical capitalist or whatever he calls himself now.
Right.
But Stefan still rad caps, but he still fancies himself an anarchist, and then
he does.
Like yesterday he said,
and he promotes the philosophy still, and he
exactly
he talks about free market capitalism. He's still a peaceful parent promoter, so
right.
It is weird, those few exceptions that he makes to the principles he still promotes.
So. Right, and he still, so like yesterday he said McCarthy was right. I've yet to see him really level any criticism of Trump, even when Trump's doing things exactly like what Obama or Bush or Clinton did. I was just curious what your thoughts on that were. Like, it seems to be like a real disconnect between the Stefan that did the story of your enslavement and still seems to have those beliefs, and the Stefan that thinks, I guess, that the government needs to be there to protect us from dangerous low IQ minorities. Like, what do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, you could probably sense some of my sentiment. Like, I don't like it. I feel disappointed. Like when I heard he thought stop and frisk was fine and necessary.
Right.
And it works. But it's like a weird, I feel conflicted because, and I also, like I do catch myself sometimes having all or nothing thinking, which is a core issue can be a core issue from childhood, like depending, on trauma. But so I catch myself sometimes being like, oh, look, he's all good, or oh, he's all bad because he did this.
Right.
But it's somewhere in the middle. Like he really does want freedom, and he is an anarchist in what he believes. Except for those exceptions. We could argue on those semantics.
Right.
He still promotes peaceful parenting. He still promotes self-knowledge being really important. He promotes having vulnerable conversations. He promotes virtue, like focusing on courage, honesty, loyalty, things like that. Like that's so critical and crucial to getting to a free society.
Right.
It's like I just shake my head when I hear the status stuff.
The other stuff.
And I would love to talk to him about it one day. I don't know if that will ever happen, but I don't know. And then sometimes I have the thought, like, is he just this Machiavellian person who's like, you know what? I was at, 120K subscribers on YouTube, and it took me, 10 years to get to this audience. Let me start covering Trump in the elections. And then his reach went all the way to right now it's like 800,000.
Yeah.
Crazy. in the 2 or 3 year span that he started, covering Trump and peeling more to conservatives
Right,
and
right.
Christians, because he also has said that he used to be like really focused on debunking Christianity and pointing
Yeah,
out
yeah.
the beliefs are null hypotheses, which he still holds.
Right.
But he said he has respect for the culture of like Christianity, of like wanting like some of them are anti-state because they believe their ruler is God or whatever.
That's me, by the way. I'm very much an anarcho-Christian. So yeah,
Oh, okay.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and like how monogamy is part of the culture,
Right, right.
two-parent homes, things like that. So, yeah, so I don't know. I thought that, but of course, that's just speculation. I don't really have evidence for it. But
So, but that's actually a good theory that it might be that there's a marketing angle to it too, because I've leveraged
I
that a
think
little
there
bit.
is. There's
I've
got to be some marketing angle, although it's not to say that that means he's just lying when he says he believes in stop and frisk. I think he legit thinks that it's in order for us to transition or to like keep away globalism. I think he legit believes that the state needs to intervene in immigration.
Right, right, right. Yeah, no, I think he does, but I do think there may be a level of what he leans on or focuses on being a marketing angle, and I've tried to leverage that a
Mhm.
little because
Yeah.
I have a lot of my conservative and even some of my moderate right-leaning friends who will share Molyneux stuff, and I'm like, wow, he's really he's definitely increased
Reaching
his
them.
reach. Yeah.
Yeah, when
And,
before it was not like that. Like
no, 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 not at all.
it
And
was like only anarchists, and
it
everyone was like, "He's a cult leader."
well, yeah, exactly. And so when
So
they'll
he's
share that stuff.
appealed more to the Republicans and conservatives. So.
Oh, they're a huge fan of his now, and when they'll share that stuff, I'll go, "Oh, I like Molyneux. Here's my favorite video," and I'll share the story of your enslavement, and hopefully they watch it. And so
Yeah.
if he's not using it for marketing purposes for anarchism, I at least am trying to on the back end.
Right.
So but that's an interesting theory. I'd never thought of it that way, but
Yeah.
that could very
I,
well
I
be
think
it.
there's definitely some marketing angle, like in terms of shifting his rhetoric to appeal more. Like he uses more collectivist language sometimes, like saying "we" or "the people" and stuff.
Right, right. Well,
Which
and
is
and and in his defense, his where he said McCarthy was right. He was talking specifically about keeping communists out of government. So it wasn't McCarthy's
oh, got
right.
it, got it.
Yeah. So I mean, I
In
did.
everything, but
Yeah, out of
that one
everything. But
aspect,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So now your family actually, correct me if I'm wrong. They actually escaped communism. Am I correct?
Yeah. Oh, did you see the Tom Woods interview
Yeah,
I had?
yeah. I caught. I think I
Yeah, I
read the
mentioned that.
transcript on it. But
Oh,
I was
cool.
interested. Do you mind kind of telling us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. So obviously I didn't experience it. I was born here in
Mm-hmm.
America.
Mm-hmm.
So after my family fled to here, so I'm just hearing from my mom like the story, and also from my grandma as well, before she passed away. So I've heard things here and there, like stories from my aunts and my mom and my grandma. So what I know based on what they have told me is um, my grandma and her family, when she was really young, she lived in China,
Okay.
and I don't know which region. I want to definitely explore more like of the details.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but apparently my grandma's uncle was fighting in a war against like the Japanese, I think.
Okay.
Japanese government and military. I don't like to say the Japanese because it's like
All
you mean that
Japanese
grandma
people,
over
right?
there? No, right? Yeah.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so he was killed, and then they fled to Cambodia. My
Okay.
grandma and her parents, and then they started their own business there. And then eventually, the Khmer Rouge
Hmm.
took over Cambodia,
Right.
and they started executing people. My grandma had children actually, so she spent a lot of her life in Cambodia. She met a man there, had kids with, including my mom. She had like, gosh, like six kids, six or
Oh
seven
wow.
kids.
Okay.
One of them, so my aunt, my late aunt then, was dragged away by the Khmer Rouge and shot and
Oh
executed
wow.
in front of them. Um, and their businesses were overtaken by them
Right.
as well. So they had to flee on foot through like a forest, I'm told, with only her mom who was left of her parents through the woods to Vietnam. And then I heard that my great grandma, so my grandma's mom, couldn't make the trek and she decided to stay behind and die on a tree,
Oh,
like
wow.
in the forest. Like, I feel sad, like thinking about it. And, like,
Yeah, that's
my
terrible.
eyes well.
I'm
But yeah,
sorry.
so they went to yeah. Um, they went to Vietnam and then they tried to start anew. They had their own like garden in their home, and they're actually pretty well off compared to others around where they lived. And they would like make pho and other food in the street. Like there was a lot of sharing between neighbors of like food and crops and stuff.
Right.
And then the Vietnam War happened, and I know some stories about like my grandma told me like one time the Viet Cong, so communists took over the North first,
Right.
and they lived in the South in southern Vietnam.
Hmm.
So they had like some at one point Viet Cong soldiers come to their house, and my grandma had to lie and say that she only had daughters because the Viet Cong were looking for boys and men to go fight against the Americans.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
So,
so
and so they then at some point they came here, obviously.
yeah, I'm told like they faced worries of there being bombs. Like anytime they heard an airplane, they dug out they had a hole dug out, and then they'd just go hide in that hole, like in a
Man,
dirt hole, and then like cover themselves with like leaves and sticks and stuff.
man.
So yeah, eventually uh, they got papers. Like one of my aunts, or two of my aunts actually, they worked together to like get everyone the proper paperwork, right? And then they went on an airplane to America. So it's interesting. They're like fresh off the boat, but just in the terms, not really in the modality. They went by airplane.
Right, right. Yeah, I think for
But
most
yeah,
people, the term "fresh off the boat" is now just a colloquialism, more so than actually coming off of a literal ship.
right.
But it's interesting because
Yeah.
my grandparents, or at least my father's side, came to the U.S. to escape the pogroms in Russia, and so it's
Mm.
interesting.
Mhm.
We being people that were born here, we're able to wax philosophical about the consequences of statism or communism or any of these things, and yet from our relative comfort, sitting here on the internet doing this, and
Mhm.
your grandparents and great grandparents really like experienced
The violence
the actual,
directly.
yeah, the
Yeah.
final conclusion of what
Hmm.
happens when these ideologies come up against each other. So
Yeah.
out of curiosity, so
Although I
you're
will say we do, it's just more insidious.
that's what I mean. Yeah,
Like I don't
we're
like looking at my paycheck, and I know that if I were to not pay my taxes, that yeah, I would be
Oh, it would be
targeted.
every bit as violent. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it would take longer. They'd send
Yeah.
letters first and all of that. But yeah, no, and I tell people that I say you're not free. You're just so conditioned, and I say you meaning me as well. And we're so conditioned to just accept this because they have overwhelming force against us that we don't
Hmm.
fight back. And so they're
Yeah.
able to do it in this much more nicey nice way of saying, oh, just a remind, because I've always been
Right.
self-employed, so it's not taken out of my taxes. They send me letters and just a reminder that whatever, and it's like, yeah, okay.
Ugh. And
And
even I think the IRS has a customer service department
oh
too,
yeah,
right? So
yeah, and
like,
they're actually very nice. Like when you call them, they're very nice, and it's
right,
it's
because
it's
just regular people working at the
it's just
the
regular
IRS customer.
people. It's like they say about the cops. They just want to get home to their families, right? Like they just, they're just going and they're just doing their jobs and they just want to get home to their families. And I'm not even mad at them, but it's the whole, it
Well,
is
I am at
insidious.
some. Yeah, I agree with you. Most of them just want to go home, but it doesn't excuse their
No, it
behavior.
doesn't excuse what they've chosen to do with their lives, but it
Yeah.
is, it's an insidious thing. So
Yeah.
it's
Hmm.
interesting. Now, are your parents, grandparents, are mother, grandmother, are they like distrustful of government in general, or because it's so almost night and day, the difference in what they experience there versus here, are they just really happy about the US government, or how does that work?
Yeah, they're definitely distrustful. They don't have the philosophical articulation of it.
Right.
Like they're not going to say, "Oh, I'm a capitalist," or
Right.
but they I grew up, learning that they're like, "Oh, don't call the police if, there's a dispute at home, like we can handle it." Like basically they don't trust the police cuz they even told me they're like, "Oh, usually the police are just here to like arrest somebody. They're not really here to like resolve disputes in a peaceful way."
Well, they're not.
Um yeah.
Right.
I've heard my mom and my aunts be really angry about their property taxes, and like my mom being like, "What the heck? I work so," she says, "goddamn hard." She's like, "I work so goddamn hard, and they just take my money, and they're not doing anything."
Right.
Or my aunt, she said this something similar where she just sold a house, and the state took
Oh
like
yeah.
250,000 just for the property, like, or not property taxes, just some sort of tax.
Right. The
She was
capital gains
just
tax. Yeah.
so angry because she had that home like since I can remember, since I
Right.
was born. Like,
Right.
and since she could finally sell it, they took 250,000. They didn't do anything.
They
They
did
didn't provide
nothing
any
for it.
value.
Nope.
So yeah, I see that sentiment of distrust, but I also see the mentality that they can't do anything about it. Like I talked to my mom about the nature of taxes, and like she agrees with me it's
Right.
theft, but she goes, "But what can you do?" Like, what can you do?
Which is true. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not a philosophical argument, but it's also true, right? Like, what can you do? Like, we're sitting here talking about this and hopefully spreading that message, but there's
Hmm.
not, short of going up against and and essentially either getting caged or dying. There's not really anything we can do, and that doesn't fix it anyway because they'll still take all your stuff. So so
Hmm.
it's a
Yeah.
tough one. But they're right. What can you do?
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
what you can do is what you've been doing, which is growing quite a brand for yourself and building quite a following on social media. What do you think have been the your biggest steps to getting successful? And I am asking this as someone that's trying to grow my brand as well. So this isn't just a abstract question. I'm curious like
Yeah.
what you've actually done.
Yeah. I will say, to add on what you're saying, like the goal with what I'm doing is trying to change minds.
Right.
And that's really what it takes, is when the people who are governed no longer consent. And as an individual, it's hard to just be like, "Okay, I have nobody to talk to, and I'm just going to go ahead and stop paying taxes." And
Right.
if you get targeted, like, and threatened, like, you don't have other people who agree that you shouldn't be taken away.
Right.
You probably even have, like, with my mom, her neighbors just be like, "Oh, well, she didn't pay her
She didn't
taxes."
pay her taxes.
Like,
Yeah.
they wouldn't take up arms and be like, "This is fucked up. You're kidnapping
Right.
somebody." Like,
Right.
so a big part of it is just changing minds in the culture, which we're going up against decades of indoctrination from the state
Yeah.
all around the world, different
Yeah.
governments. So yeah, anyway, back to your question. Um, I think that one of the big things that have helped has been being able to be featured on other existing big liberty pages.
Mm.
Like Anarchy Ball has been a great help. I
Right.
don't know if you know Anarchy Ball.
Oh yeah.
Like they were taken over by some. I don't know what it is.
I
Like,
know.
yeah, I feel so bad. I'm just like, why did you let this happen? It was, yeah. Anyway,
You go on and it's
side
all
drama.
clickbait now. Yeah, I
I
hate that. I
know.
know. It's like this has nothing to do with anarchy or balls. Like what it
I
like
know.
what yeah,
I
no, I
mean,
know.
now they are starting to put more tasteless gentlemen like memes, but yeah, definitely not about anarchy at all.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, so they're taking over, but they started their own new page. But
Right.
anyway, before that ever happened, I got to post a lot of my memes on their page and share my videos and stuff. And they already had like, it was like 80, 90,000 when I first started with them, and then
Hmm.
eventually went over 100,000. So I was leveraging their success and their reach already. So that was one page that helped me a lot to grow. Um, what else? Oh, being libertarian, they
Oh
had
yeah.
like, yeah, 400,000 when I had my taxation of theft video uploaded to their page.
Mhm.
That went so viral. I think it's over 4 million now, which is
Wow.
amazing because that's
That's
over 4
insane.
million who
Yeah.
hear taxation is theft.
Yep.
And I don't mind the triggered comments because it just means someone's actually thinking about it. Like
Yeah.
people are thinking about it. So I was like, cool. So that boosted that drew I think it was over 10,000 just new people to my page at that time. That was 2 years ago, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, so just leveraging the existing success of others, and I hope that me sharing your video in our interview will help you too. I
That's
don't know
what I'm
how
thinking
much.
the whole time you're
I
talking. I'm
know.
like, leverage more popular people. Check. So yeah, okay.
Philosophers here. I know.
Philosopher check.
Yeah,
No,
and
yeah.
then two more notable ones was Jeff Berwick. I went on
Yeah.
Anarchist. That
Yeah.
was the first really big libertarian podcast I was on.
Okay.
And then most recently, Tom Woods
Mhm.
podcast. So I had a lot of people reach out to me or comment on my videos or memes and say, "Oh wow, I found you through Jeff Berwick or Tom Woods." So just reaching out to fellow content creators who are doing well. Maybe you should have Carrie Wedler, by the way. She's been doing this. I don't know if you have you interviewed Carrie Wedler?
No. You're only my.
Oh,
This
okay.
is still relatively new. You are my 20th guest,
Oh wow. Okay, yeah.
and my
We're pretty
first
new.
4 or 5 guests were like my friends. So, so
Hey, that's how it starts.
no, yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So Carrie
Yeah.
Wedler.
Yeah, you should look her up. She's been an activist for so long.
Okay.
I don't know, at least 6 years. I could be wrong, but um, I think she started making videos when Ron Paul ran for office in
Oh wow.
2012. Yeah,
Oh wow.
I think
Okay.
2012. I might be getting dates wrong. Anyway, but yeah, she's cool and has a pretty big following. I think on Facebook she has over 200,000 or something like that. And she's a very principled voluntarist. And she's very witty and smart. So she'd be a fun guest to have.
Cool.
And then maybe that could help, give you more publicity as well. So
Cool.
yeah,
Cool.
so that has been helpful. And then another thing I would say that has led to just more followers and likes or just reach has been certain viral videos I've had.
Mm-hmm.
The taxation stuff was one, but I wonder if that was because it was posted on being libertarian. I don't know.
Right.
The other videos that have gone the most viral for me have been things about guns. So I had one where I think actually my first video was gun control is violence. And then that went pretty far and then drew a lot, thousands of new followers in the beginning. And then since then, I had another one which was 3 gun control myths debunked.
Yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and I released it at I think it was when there was that Las Vegas shooting that happened. So it's in the news cycle, people talking about gun control and basically kind of playing off current events. That's a big help for reach and reaching people beyond, the libertarian circles.
Right,
So
because
yeah,
if you focus solely on just philosophy as an abstract thing, you're going to get people like me because we're really into that.
yeah.
I have to stop. I'm sorry. This is just okay. So, no one else will notice it.
Hilarious.
It's just
Just the
enough.
slightest move.
Just and I'm as you're talking, I'm looking. I'm like, this thing is tilted. This thing's tilted, and no one will notice that I just did that. So
I want to know what your MBTI is. Anyway, keep going.
Oh my
Do you know what it is from Myers-Briggs?
OCDD. I don't know.
OCD.
I don't know. I think
That
I'm
could
the
be me.
whatever the debater is. I forget because I did the one where it then says what you're I don't remember the 4 letters, but it said the
ENTP?
debater. Yeah,
That's the debater. Yeah, ENTP.
probably.
So are you extroverted, big picture thinking, a logical, linear thinker? Like you base your beliefs off logic and reason, and then you
Yes,
more go
that
with
part's
the
true.
flow. You kind of go with the flow. You don't really like a strict schedule.
Oh, that's definitely true.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that is me. I'm an ENTP. We'll go with
Okay.
that. I like that better than when people ask my astrology sign. I'm like, I'm not 100%
Oh my
certain, but
gosh.
I don't really care. But
I know.
so I've totally off.
Oh yeah, I got you off your topic.
That's okay. No, that's okay. You were talking about guns. I remember that.
Guns.
And
Oh yeah, current events. So covering
oh,
current events. Yeah.
yes. So,
Oh right, philosophy.
philosophy. Yeah, so if we just talk about philosophy as like this kind of abstract idea,
Mm.
you'll get people like me because that's what we're into. We're into philosophy because I'm an ENTP. But for the vast majority of people, they're thinking more. They don't think about ideas as much as they do about people or events. And so it sounds
Mhm.
like if you kind of leverage those things
Yeah.
and find as popular as an outlet as you can find to talk about that, then you're gonna grow your reach exponentially doing that.
Oh, exactly. I mean, like for the example we were talking about, Stefan, when he covered Trump, people were so attracted to his personality, that they would look, just be curious about what Stefan would say about
Right, right,
Trump,
right.
even though they didn't even know who Stefan was. Yeah, so I definitely can see that play out in the videos I post. Like if I post the 3 fundamental principles of voluntarism, something, I'll get like 5,000 views or
Which is
something
still
like that.
respectable, right? But yeah,
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 it is. And then compare that to the gun control one that I posted, especially in the during when gun control debate was in the news cycle. That
right,
went
right,
to, I
right.
think it's over 2 million now, if I'm not mistaken, at least.
And
So
that's a
it's like,
perennial
what
one
a
too.
drastic difference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Perennial? Perennial?
Yeah, it's perennial. It's so anytime gun control comes up, that's a video people can refer to. You didn't just
Oh,
make it specifically for that. That'll live on for forever.
yeah, exactly. And in that, I cover the principles. So it's great, for your guys' podcast. Any current events would probably help, like anything huge. You can cover that, but then seed in the principles. And,
And
yeah.
that's what we do on the main show on the Muddied Waters of Freedom. We talk
Yeah.
about the events and how they do that. I think the one thing we need to be doing is we do these incredibly long shows, right? So and they're fairly popular, but I know when I'm looking at someone else's hour and a half long show, I gotta really like them to fully tune
Oh,
into
yeah.
it.
I'm with you there.
And
Exactly.
so I think that, and there's a place for that, but I do think we need to start doing like snippets from our shows,
Yes.
and also like videos that are just like the videos you do that are just short 5 minutes or less 3 minute videos that
Steven Crowder. Have you heard of Steven
yeah,
Crowder?
oh yeah, Steven Crowder, yeah,
Yeah, they do that. I mean, it is a show. Like they have
right,
their long show, and if you subscribe to his website, join the Mug Club or whatever, then you get
right.
access to the full show. But they always take snippets, and then they create some sort of clickbaity title like "Think Ungar is a fucking idiot" or
Right,
something,
right,
whatever.
right.
Like, or I, obviously they didn't say that, but something like that because he has a
Steven
Christian
owns
audience.
Snowflake Lib, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but they do that, or like, why gun control is wrong or something. I can't remember
right,
the exact
right,
title. But yes, and it'll only be like 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes at the most. So
right.
yeah, that's good. And that will help someone just have the attention span to just be like,
To
okay,
catch
it's
that
only
little
10,
bit,
15. Yeah.
right.
Versus, I think there's a psychology. I've at least noticed it in myself where if I open a video and I see that it's like more than 10 minutes, I'll be like, do
I
I
do the same
really
thing.
want? Yeah,
I
okay,
know.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but when it's under 10, I'm like, okay, I can, spend the time to do this. And the
Right.
shorter the better almost. That's
Yeah,
why I
I
try to
know.
do my
I
videos, but
know.
it's hard when you're doing a podcast where it's conversational. How do you
How do you make it be 20
start
minutes?
to,
without doing it like how they do on the news shows where I just keep interrupting you every 10 seconds to make it a 3-minute thing. And it's everyone, has to drink a bunch of coffee beforehand. And what do you think? Well, I'm really pissed off about it. Well, let me stop you there. Cause and I don't want to do that. I want it to be like a conversational thing. But for example, I interviewed
Crowder can do the bite-sized sound bites because it's just him talking usually.
Right. Exactly.
Like rant for a little bit.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. Like, one of his most popular things is a picture of him with a cup of coffee, and it says there are only two genders, change my mind. And that became like, a viral meme where everyone changed whatever the topic was and still had to change my mind. No one even knows who Steven Crowder is, that's sharing it, and it's, got tens of millions of shares. So,
exactly.
So that's definitely a good point. In fact, one of the things you've been posting about is, I think you're on day 270 something or 260 something of the 365 days of posting stories about defensive gun use, where you post stories about people that have, the good guy with a gun stories where they've defended themselves with a gun. What gave you the idea to do that?
Just seeing like all the rhetoric around gun violence and people saying, oh, guns are only used for violence and we need to end gun violence, like this hysteria of focusing just on the freaking weapon and not the people. I'm like, are you serious? Like imagine if they applied their logic to pens. They're like, we need to ban pens because stupid people can write articles about stupid shit. I don't know.
They're assault pens, yeah.
Yeah, or they can advocate for violence, or they can use their keyboards to advocate for violence on the internet.
That's a good point.
It's like and then on all other cases, they don't focus on the inanimate object.
Right.
Yeah, they look at the thing that has the will, the human being. So it was annoying, and also seeing like people saying that most often gun owners, like anyone who has a gun, will use it for violence. So I wanted to really debunk that. I did it in the memes, but I thought posting stories of DGUs, like every day, like just recent things that happen may help. So,
and the fact that there's so many stories that you can easily just post one a day, I think it's pretty powerful. Yeah.
There's a subreddit called this defensive gun store, DGU stories, I think, or maybe it's just DGU. But anyway, like people are posting things every day of local stories. And if you notice, like these stories are not covered on like CNN,
no,
MSNBC, like things like that. Fox News will cover some of it sometimes. But it's always on the very local to the city, like news channels, some small thing, and there's, not much visibility anyway, but it's posted and things happen every day.
And it's not going to get national coverage because that doesn't meet the narrative of,
right.
Guns aren't bad. There are people that are bad that use them for bad. Putting aside the fact that we know that end gun violence means use massive amounts of gun violence to stop, centralize the ability to use gun violence. But I live in the Myrtle Beach area in South Carolina, very pro gun area. You turn on the news and often we'll have a story about, someone broke into a house and they got shot dead. And I picture everyone's at home and they go, good, and they shrug and move on to the next thing. Like, but we're a very pro-gun area. I don't think, for example, in certain metro areas, they're getting those kinds of stories and even realize that, no, the gun isn't the problem. But yeah, so.
Yeah, I actually, so I come from Washington, and recently they had an assault weapons ban, which was basically just semi-automatic rifles that look like the AR-15. So, which was like crazy that they did that.
So like your 22 long rifle now is illegal.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But I remember growing up, and of course this is anecdotal, so I recognize that. But just looking at the news and the shows that were up, it was like very pro cop, or if there was any crime that happened, there was never indication that someone defended themselves. It would always be like a story that ended in tragedy and like the police were called or something. But never hearing someone defended themselves successfully, like never hear that, or I didn't hear that growing up either. So Yeah, I don't know if that's just, the local news stations for a specific city, and it varies on the culture of
Right, of
that
course,
city.
of course, and your
Probably. Yeah.
perception of how it played out or whatever too as well. It's
Yeah.
interesting in fictional stories. The police are often the denouement of the story, right? So you have the climax of the people fighting or whatever, and then the police. The sirens are what you hear when the bad parts happen, and now the police have come in. And I wonder how much that is conditioning of like it's okay, the police are here now. Like there's this
Yeah.
sort of like everything's gonna be okay now that we hear sirens and the more gentle music comes on. It's like the police are here now. It's gonna get more dangerous, but in
I
the
think
story,
that's
it's not.
definitely part of the conditioning.
Oh yeah,
Like, just, they don't even need to say it directly. Just
yeah.
like you said, the sirens
The
coming, the
sirens are
peaceful
here.
music, in even in the DGU stories I post, the main image is usually like a cop car.
Yep.
Like, even though the person defending themselves was, again, like,
Was the
main
actual
image is a
story.
freaking cop who came
Yeah.
after the fact. you know.
Yeah. What I like about
So,
and it makes a lot of conservatives and pro cop people angry, is that whole narrative is being debunked by people with their cameras on their phones showing this is what we experience with the police every day. And so they're getting, it's kind of shaking that narrative, and it's making people uncomfortable, but it's because they're actually seeing, no, this is what the consequence often is of the police getting involved, because they're not there to make it better. They're there to use whatever level of violence is necessary to bring everyone within earshot or eye shot into compliance with whatever laws that cop can remember in that moment. And that's the best
yeah.
case scenario. That's if the cop's not crooked. So,
Yeah, for sure. I love all the cop block and police
oh
the
yeah,
police pages that have sprouted up. It's great to just
yeah,
expose the nature of policing.
yeah,
Not to say like all cops are evil or bad, like we were saying earlier. It's that the nature of policing is what the issue is. The fact
yeah.
that they're agents of the state and their incentives aren't predicated on, getting customers and making them happy.
Right,
They're
exactly.
paid through coercion, and they'll get money no matter what. And if one guy is actually corrupt and he kills somebody, he can get 2 weeks vacation and then come back.
And that gives time for the police union to rally for his cause and to get all the pro police people to say, well, what happened before that video of him shooting the guy 15 times, and
Yeah.
then they go, well, we determined that he complied with all, what's the word, he followed the proper regulation or whatever the proper
Oh, the
protocol.
protocol.
The protocol. Okay,
Yeah.
great. He followed the protocol. Then there's something wrong with the protocol.
Right.
It's like I tell people, there are two ways you can get services. Any service: protection, common defense, food, healthcare, roads, whatever, internet service, whatever. One is through competing providers in a market where they're going to basically trip over each other to try to provide you with the best value for service, value for your money, so that they get your money instead of their competitor. The other way you can get it is through a monopoly that gets your money regardless. So they may or may not even provide you with the service because they're going to get your money anyway. They're the only business in town.
Yeah, you
Government,
point out the incentives.
right? Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. It's the incentive. Government is not only a monopoly; they're a violent monopoly that's financed by theft and enforced with violence and threats of violence. I have so many people tell me, well, you're saying all this, but if you tried to stop the government, they'd kill you. And I say that's an argument in favor of what I'm saying. That's that your only response is they'll murder me. I know that. That's part of what's wrong with this. Like and they're so conditioned into thinking that's a good idea because the state is kind of this toxic codependent relationship played out on a massive scale, all the way to the point where if you try to leave, they'll kill you. And so I had a point.
Yeah.
Go
A
ahead.
lot
I'll
of
let you talk
people.
because I had a point and couldn't remember it. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. If you remember, feel free to interject.
Yeah, go ahead.
It made me think of like everyone, most people, like the thin blue line people, for example,
Yeah.
or the people who look up to politicians, people who look up to their oppressors, basically.
Yeah.
They have like Stockholm Syndrome, because I think everyone, even the thin blue line people, even like the most major statists, not excluding the actual politicians, people who are in
Right.
power, like the sheep who are statists, they all recognize like at least subconsciously, the inherent violence, and they do feel fear thinking of, not paying taxes. Like they almost get that
Oh yeah, yeah,
subconsciously.
of course.
But I don't know what it is. It's like they have cognitive dissonance. They excuse the violence and they say, oh, taxes are being taken out. I actually consent to this because it's, paying for schools and I'm helping people. And
Right,
it's
right,
like
right.
a way to justify it versus stopping and analyzing, whoa, why do I feel this fear? And what is that about? You know what I mean? Like
Right.
people just kind of go along with their day and try to uh, find the easiest route in their minds
Yeah.
to
Well,
justify, how they
it,
feel.
it's every logical fallacy at once. It's the appeal to authority. It's the appeal to popularity. Well, everyone else thinks we need a government, and government's in charge, so we must listen to them. It's
Mm-hmm.
ad hominem against anyone who actually is telling you things that you innately know to be true, and it's definitely a conditioning thing. That was my
Mm-hmm.
point, by the way. I did find out my
Oh,
point
okay.
while I
Good.
was listening to you. I figured out my point, which is that one of the things that you talk about is that all of this starts as a child, and we kind of touched on
Mm-hmm.
that earlier, that it starts as a child, that you're so conditioned that state equals good, that you're
Yes.
able later to use terms like necessary evil, which would
Yeah.
never be
Right.
applied in any other scenario. But
Yeah.
it's
Right.
so ingrained that, well, this is good, so yeah, it's evil, but it's necessary. We have to have one. Why? Well, we
Yeah.
do. And so
Exactly.
so you talk about the unschooling and homeschooling methods and peaceful parenting. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how starting with your child, you know, as a child, and how that can really help to create the more open and set free society that we want.
Yeah. So, um, I think, statism or the belief in it, it all starts in childhood.
Right.
And I mean, it makes sense because everyone's worldview was formed in their childhoods, mostly. Like their most deepest worldviews that, if challenged, like they would have an emotional like attachment to, the conclusion of, like everyone developed certain ways of viewing humanity and the nature of reality in their childhoods.
Hmm.
Um, and so, statism is just one of the more prolific ones that most people have
Right.
experienced is the propaganda for statism and the indoctrination. Indoctrination would occur in public schools or through parents as well, at home, friends, local communities, and then the propaganda is in like the media. And for children, there's a lot of propaganda for statism in movies, Disney being a big part of that.
Right.
Like you have all these princess movies that put on a pedestal being a royalty and that it's
Mm.
good and just to be, um, uh, you know, living off of everyone else.
Everyone else who in those movies
Yeah.
are thrilled about it. They
Right.
love
They
this.
love it. They're like,
Thank you for
oh,
taking my money.
my
Yeah.
princess, my king, like,
Right. Right.
oh,
Right.
bow down, even
Yeah. Yeah.
though
Yeah.
the king and queen, they provide nothing of value. So, well, except for they say, oh, I'll protect you. I'm going to represent all of us. That's like,
Right.
it's just like the states, another part of
Right.
the state.
And they
But
have beautiful singing voices as well in the movie.
right, exactly. And they're just like these beautiful people.
Right, they're just gorgeous people with great, which never play. I've yet to see
And
an
they're
attractive.
benevolent.
They're
That's the
very
other thing.
benevolent. They're not. They don't look a thing like the royal family in the UK, for instance, who I don't think can sing and are not terribly attractive. But people are thinking
Yeah.
that in their heads, so that's funny.
Uh-huh, right. So that's a deep conditioning and it just
Yeah.
all happens subconsciously. Um it and it's happening during a time where a human being has the least discernment and is the most um what's the word? Impressionable,
Right.
because they don't have a framework for determining falsehoods from truth. They that needs to be taught to
Right.
kids. And oftentimes that, especially in public school, that desire to develop a methodology for determining the truth in a consistent way is crushed, because in public schools there's a focus on just memorization, rote memorization, pleasing the teacher, not questioning the teacher's information, and if you do, you're not respecting their experience as a teacher.
Their authority, right.
You should now be detained on the weekends, stuff like that. So yeah, kids from a very early age, or people from a very early age, were forcibly, you know, like conditioned to like worship mandatory authority. Teachers being one of them, because as a kid, if you go to public school, you're at the will of your parents and the school, and oftentimes a lot of parents see public schools as a place for babysitting, and they're like, well, I'll just drop my kids off, and I trust the teachers. They themselves were indoctrinated in public school, so they're just like, oh yeah, public school's great. These teachers can teach my child better than I can, plus I can make more money by going to work. And both parents have to work now because of inflation.
Inflation and taxation, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So it like creates this incentive for parents to just like, oh, I don't have the money, so let's just drop them off here. And they also don't have the knowledge of the nature of public school either. So kids are corralled into these buildings. They're forced to learn certain things. They don't get freedom to choose and dive deep into whatever curiosity they have. If it's math class time, you're told to put away that book. You must listen to the teacher for this hour of time, and
it's
when
now
the bell
math
rings,
time, right.
Yeah, and when the bell rings, you need to change gears quickly and shuffle to your next class and make sure you focus. And I got in trouble a lot in public school, like despite being, getting A+, like I really want an A+. And being like,
you said that, not me, but yes,
I did.
Yeah, you did say it.
And despite like really wanting my teachers like validation, I would get in trouble a lot just for talking. Like I love talking. I'm an extrovert too, and I love talking to my classmates, like telling jokes or anything like that. And I'd always be told to like shut up and stuff. So yeah.
I never got ultimately I got it, but I never, until you said it, the whole you're being detained thing. You're being detained just by being there at the school for the most part. There's a lot of parallels to There's a lot of parallels to prison there. The bells, and the bell means do this and go to that.
Oh yeah, prison's just like that. They have bells for like, oh, lunchtime, time to go to lunch. You're not free to go to the fucking cafeteria when you want to get food because you're hungry.
You're hungry.
You have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom and hold your pee or poop if the teacher's like, oh, I'm in the middle of a lecture.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to tell you something. Well, I have to poop really bad. Well, you have to hold it. You're being detained from pooping. But I never had gotten that there were times I would get in trouble. My parents would come in because I was the spoiled Jew kid who my parents would come in and fight on my side. But they, my dad would come in and explain how I was a great kid and I clearly did nothing wrong. And if they didn't agree with him, I'd get punished and there was nothing he could do about it. And I'd never really made that connection that it was like, your parents
like at
are
that
not
point,
in
the school owned you.
Yeah.
Not even your parents had a say.
And my dad would walk away angry, but he didn't fight it because what are you going to do? He'll end up in jail. Like, so I really, I mean, if I had fleshed it out, I would have gotten there, but you're right. It's truly like you're being detained and there's nothing you can do about it short of your parents, which they at times did, pulling me out and saying, no, we'll just school them ourselves, which thankfully in this state we're allowed to do. Some I believe that you're actually not allowed to do that, or they put such onerous.
And CPS can be called because it's like seen as, if you don't have your children enrolled in a public school, it can be seen as like abuse
or neglect.
Yeah. Right. So it basically, it's translating the idea at an early age that you don't own yourself.
Yeah.
And that can happen outside the public school too. That's why I focus also on peaceful parenting.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask you about. So
because parents can be just as authoritarian.
Easily. And violent. Like most schools now don't actually use corporal punishment, right? But most parents, or at least a good number of parents,
they do with the detentions, but they don't do the paddling.
They don't actually physically hit them. I mean, it's corporal punishment, but it's not like physical violence unless they bring the police in. So whereas with a lot of parents, you could just like mouth off and get hit. So talk
Yeah.
to me about that, because I was someone who, when I first heard peaceful parenting, my parents, I can count on one hand the number of times I was spanked. So I didn't come from one of these, well, I got the brake speed off me and I just turned out fine. But I just sort of naturally bristled at, like, when I first heard it, I'm like, well, sometimes you may have to do it. And it was like, well, why? And I'm like, because you do. And
But why?
yeah, but why? And I'm like, well, but, I turned out
And
fine.
compared to what?
And compared to what? Exactly. Yes, the consummate economist, right? But so talk to me about that, because a lot of people bristle at that. But if you're, well, I'll let you say it. Talk to me about it.
Oh, sure. Um, oh gosh, that's a lot. But I mean, violence starts in childhood, and it can come from the public schooling system and like parents who are just neglectful. Like the parents don't even have to be physically abusive. Like in my case, I wasn't physically abused. My mom said she spanked me once when I was like a baby.
Right.
Which, side note, I'm like, I wasn't capable of reason. Why'd you spank me? So I think it was like she had an emotional outburst.
Yeah, it's like a frustrated, yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know what to do. So I
Right.
don't remember that. But
Right.
more so, I was neglected in my childhood, didn't really have much support, emotional support. I had a lot of financial support.
Right.
My parents, my mom, yeah, my parents just worked really hard, and usually if I needed anything, like, oh, I wanted to try a computer, like they were really good about that and figuring out a way to get me resources economically.
Right.
But like in terms of like emotional support and validation, that wasn't there. And interactions were usually full of like shame, like, like shamed for what I thought, shamed for crying, like told like, oh, you should stop crying. It's not a big deal. Like, that's being invalidated for your emotional state.
Right.
So it varies like between people. Some people got the abuse mainly from public school, like the direct one, whether through like peers, bullies, or like teachers who are bullies in the administration who are bullies. And then some got it directly from their parents, and then some got both,
Right. Yeah.
which is sad.
Yeah.
But I focus on it because I think that's how I became an anarchist. Like I said, I discovered Stefan Molyneux, and I was drawn in not because of I was curious about economics or anarchy. I was curious about relationships and my childhood and understanding myself and who I am and why I had the dysfunctions that I did at that time. That's what I was drawn in for. And when I started connecting with myself as a child and reliving or like processing the traumas that I endured.
Right.
Like, for example, my dad left when I was 7 years old, and he was
Okay.
in my life prior to that. And he was like, I loved him. He's my dad.
Right.
And
Yeah. Of course.
the trauma of being abandoned was so big for me, but I never process that and articulate. I never had gone to counseling before, and it makes sense. Nobody in my family processed their own childhood traumas anyway.
Right.
So I'm just kind of like trying to live. I'm like reacting to stimuli, just trying to process the world, but not having a framework to do that from. Not having I didn't base. I was very logical, but I wasn't a philosopher. Like I didn't.
Right.
I thought I was coming to the truth. And sometimes and it was usually off of evidence, but not everything I thought and did was based off of, the truth. Like I would believe that, oh, it's okay for me to hit my brothers and sisters because they were being, so rowdy and they were
Right.
annoying me. Like
Right.
that is something that's not philosophical. That's like my excuse. And so for like personal beliefs, I didn't analyze them under the microscope of, the scientific methodology.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so when I first started analyzing and processing, and I just remembered the times where my consent was violated when I was like pushed around by people at school or my
Right.
siblings,
Right.
or like made fun of, had my stuff taken away. Like I realized and finally connected with that pain of having my will overruled by somebody else, having my consent overruled as well. That's when I became like an anarchist. Like when I realized that and I connected, and I learned what the nature of the state was, I realized I'm definitely an anarchist. I don't know how it'll work in an anarchy society, but I know that's where I want to go.
From an ethical standpoint. Right.
Yeah, because I know that's the right thing to do, because I don't want to see other human beings suffer like I did. And that's part of my drive for being a peaceful parent, is because I know so well what it's like to be a child trying to process the world around you, how scary it can feel.
Oh, yeah.
And how your parents, like, because, they gave birth to you, they're the ones who are responsible for being like your rock and foundation and helping you to process things, but in a safe manner. Like in a way where you're like getting love, but you can learn things and you're not in danger.
Right, they're still protecting you. They're still your parents. They're not your buddies, but they're still your parents, and they still are. They're also. I had your friend Jack Lloyd on, and I was still not 100% on peaceful parenting, so I was sort of not grilling him, but asking him some. I'm like, okay, so does that mean if your kid is about to touch the hot stove, you just let them because they've got to learn? Or something? He's like, no, because that's your property, and you can say no. You don't say, no, this is my property, but because it's your property, you can stop this other person from touching it, and then explain why you're stopping them from touching it. That if you touch that, it can hurt you because it's hot and everything else. So
you can pull them away.
Right. You can still, because I was like, I thought peaceful parenting meant, you can't even physically stop your child from doing something that was going to hurt them. And he was like, no, you can still use your hands to stop someone from doing something, but, but you're more so guiding and protecting than using just violent force or abusive, verbally abusive force, or neglectful. Neglect is a form of force as well, that that you're withholding yourself to as a form of force to enforce compliant, compulsive behaviors, as opposed to actually teaching them how to think for themselves and why they should want to do this and why they should want to do that and not do that. So it
requires a philosophical parent, because kids are going to ask why. First of all, that's one thing. And that's one of the insidious abuses too, and how people, children get scared to develop like a framework of philosophy, because they get shamed with all these like platitudes, like, oh, if you don't read the Bible, like, I'm gonna ground you or whatever, or you're just a child, you should just respect your elders, like your opinion doesn't matter. Yep. Like I got that. And like I think the parents need to be philosophically capable. They need to base their own beliefs off reason and evidence, and they also need to be healed from their childhoods, because things will get emotionally difficult with children, like children, like I had my niece, like, because they're just trying to process their own emotions. Like they'll have like an emotional outburst. They don't even know how to process.
No idea
how their their little body overwhelming with stress and fear. Like, that can be, for someone who hasn't processed their own traumas, that can be really triggering and cause somebody to be like stressed themselves. And that's why I think spanking comes from emotional outbursts and the inability for someone to handle their emotions,
and a feeling of inferiority, I would think, because I think sometimes I've seen it play out where a parent is asked why, they don't know why, and that makes it really angry. And this all happens in split seconds, but they're saying something and the kid's saying why, and rather than examine that in front of the kid, they're not going to, cede a bit of authority to this kid. So instead, they're just going to either say something, well, because I said so, or if they're abusive, they're actually physically abusive.
Yeah, like some have a psychology of shame too. So when a child challenges you, you can feel some shame because you're like, what? I am right. And then especially if they can't say a good reason, then they may come back as being more punitive and say, well, just respect me. I'm uncomfortable actually analyzing. And then they're not really saying this.
They're not saying that, but that is what,
I don't really know why myself. So just believe me, I'm your elder. Like, I think
Stop being a
off,
3-year-old that's making me experience cognitive dissonance.
yeah, exactly. So I think oftentimes spanking, hitting, shame, these are all symptoms of a lack of emotional maturity. I had a therapist that I used to go to. I don't go to therapy anymore, but during that time where I became an anarchist and stuff, I did a
Mhm.
lot of self work. I had at least 2 years of like journaling, and I saw a couple therapists. And one of them would say, like, he would talk about his own parenting and how certain times he raised his daughters, and like one time he came into a room of his daughters were playing, and like stuff was everywhere, toys were everywhere,
Right.
and he said he felt so angry and he started yelling at them. They're like, clean it up, and then he stopped and he was like, whoa. He's like, I've reached the end of my emotional maturity, I'll be right back. And his daughters were like, oh, that's kind of crazy. Like, but but I mean, he
Oh,
was,
okay.
yeah, he loves that story. But it was like he had a moment of humility to say that, whoa, I feel really stressed and uncomfortable with the toys everywhere, but I'm lashing out at my child. I see fear in my daughter's eyes. I'm going to stop and take a moment to process what I feel and then think through how I can communicate to them my needs, and to say, and that's why I have the book right here, nonviolent communication, because it's all about objectively trying to communicate to others what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what your observations are, and what your needs are, and what you would like to change in order to have your needs met. And so part of peaceful parenting is having that self-knowledge. You need self-knowledge. I mean, self-knowledge, I think, is the first step to philosophy.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you don't know yourself, you're not going to be able to catch your own biases, even if you develop the framework of philosophy, even if
Oh,
you
yeah.
learn the scientific method. If you don't have self-knowledge and the ability to observe when you yourself are suffering from biases, and everyone will. There's no human being that I know of or exists today that's just perfect, that
Of course.
never suffers any biases. Like even me, I'm the philosopher, but like I'm so focused on philosophy
Right.
and the framework. But even I, like I said earlier, catch myself having all or nothing thinking
Of course,
or
yeah. Right.
collectivizing people, or, like I catch that sometimes. So yeah, and so self-knowledge is really important to be a peaceful parent. And it's really a process. And that's one of the videos I want to make next, is just like, how do you get started on the self-knowledge journey?
That'll be a good one.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So,
I was gonna say, so one of my favorite shows is The Dog Whisperer, and shows like that where the someone comes on and helps them figure out why their dog acts like a nightmare, and 9 times out of 10
yeah.
it's just in the case of Caesar, it's just him breaking down what's wrong with them, the people, and why this dog is basically just reacting to how they are, and that they're just
Right.
as nippy and yelling and freaked out as the dog is, and the dog has no idea what's going on, and it's like he helps them kind of uh, uh, um, deconstruct themselves a little, just enough so that now the dog
Oh,
acts normal. And so I mean, so
that's
if
like
it's
a metaphor for parenting, because dogs are just perpetual children. It's like they need
exactly,
to have
exactly,
children whisperers.
they
Be
have,
like,
well,
oh, the child's freaking out because mom and dad are having arguments in front of them, and the child doesn't know how to process.
has no idea
So
what's
he's
going
lashing
on and
out.
is
Yeah.
lashing out as well. Yeah.
Right.
So I have a question for you about something I've been studying a lot recently in anarchist circles. It's actually something I first started reading about in anarcho-communist circles and anarcho-mutualist circles, but it really, I think it can be applied to anything. I don't know if you heard of the concept of prefiguration?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so prefiguration, I hadn't either, so don't feel bad. And I know everything. But prefiguration is an idea that comes out of anarchist thought, which is basically that it's sort of the original answer to who will build the roads, which is us. And so the idea of prefiguration is creating alternatives to the state, creating voluntary free market, mutual aid alternatives to the state for whatever you can possibly do, even and sometimes especially when it's illegal. So an example
Also,
of
it's like agorism.
it basically is, it's agorism,
Hmm.
but it's done with a not just the goal of achieving it, but also the political bent of answering the question, well, who would do this? We will. And here's an example of us doing it. And the idea that the state, we can, in the same way that no one asks, how Uber has effectively replaced taxis, and to whatever extent taxis still exist is to whatever extent the state protects them. Amazon is destroying the big box stores because their model's better. These are all examples where just it was all in a market, but it was all prefiguration where someone said, this isn't working right, I'm going to create another version, and applying that same thinking to government. So yeah, it is a form of agorism, but it's also with the political bent of saying we can do this, and so therefore you don't need government. So it's actually pushing that political message.
So focus on the state.
Focus specifically on the state, exactly. Right. So like the Underground Railroad would be an example of prefiguration, that there are these people that aren't free. The state is not allowing them to be free. We're going to free them. It was totally illegal, but it was something that was necessary, and it helped spur the actions that eventually led to the end of at least private slavery. Now we have public sector slavery, but
right.
Another example more recently is in, I believe, Arizona. They were having a major problem with the rise of disease because of needle exchange with people reusing needles. And so they started doing, and it was against the law to give out needles, hypodermic needles that weren't under prescription. And so people just started doing it anyway, and giving out free, clean needle. They weren't giving drugs. They weren't helping people get drugs. Some were even giving information about how to, get off or get off of drugs, or, places they could go for help and things like that. But they would give them free needles and say, look, give us your dirty needles. We'll give you these clean ones. And that way you can at least stop spreading disease. And people actually went to jail for it. But it happened enough so that they eventually changed the laws so that now it's legal to give out. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. What you think about applying that that philosophy to our lives of actively finding, and unschooling is an example of that, but actively finding ways to show that we don't need the state.
Right, and to actively disobey laws.
Well, I mean, we don't encourage illegal behavior on this show because it's illegal and that's against the law. But just the idea of that. Not that we say to do that, just the idea of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for it.
Well, you said that. But okay.
Yeah. It's just up to an individual. I don't shame anyone for not, and
right.
I don't, and obviously I think it's fine when they do disobey illegal laws. I don't advocate for it either, because
right.
I recognize it's a calculation for each individual to make. Like, can I make this risk?
Right.
There's a lot of people who, for example, deal marijuana. Like, I come from Washington. Right now it's recreational weed. But before, like, I knew of, people who would deal. Like, oh shit, the NSA is watching. Oh well. But like,
who did you know? Yeah.
Right. Like, people who were just, they're still almost like still statists. They think the state's necessary. They're still in that paradigm.
Right.
But they're acting like an agorist. They're just like, oh, this is stupid that it's illegal, but I'm going to do it anyway. And they share and they trade. And they made the calculation that they're going to take that risk of being in jail or being caught. And so I think it's great. And I just think that it's not the only thing that needs to be done in order to end the state, really. I think really at the core is changing minds and changing how people communicate with each other and interact with each other, and encouraging people to resolve disputes without physical or emotional violence. That's what, the book Nonviolent Communication is about, is that you can not physically harm someone, but you can hurt them more insidiously by shaming them, making judgments on them, things like that, ridiculing them, right? So, yeah. So
that's kind of a form of prefiguration at the childhood level, right? Like, that's sort of like you're disabusing them of the conditioning that you had and that people before you had that allowed you to be status in the first place. So that's almost in a way sort of you're sort of prefigurating how you're raising your children, or how you're interacting with people in society. So that's very interesting.
Right. Like giving an alternative, and
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
And that's even legal. They can't arrest you for being nice to your kid yet. So
right. You must shame
you
your
must
child.
be a jerk to your
You
kids.
must spank. Right.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
I don't know about you. Before I became an anarchist, I was a huge political news junkie. I was originally a neocon, who then became
Okay.
sort of a paleocon / constitutionalist, and then I
See
became.
that amongst. Were you a Christian too?
Yeah, I'm a Messianic Jew. So,
Oh,
but
okay. I
it's
see that with
interesting.
Christians. Like you'll sometimes get an anarchist or like libertarian Christian. Sometimes you'll get like a neocon Christian.
Yeah, so I actually became a neocon. I was sort of politically, I think I was an unpolitically involved anarchist because I did whatever I wanted. But when 9/11 happened, I fell right into that. We have to spread democracy to fight the terrorists who hate us because we're free. It's funny that I even say that now, but I would have unironically told you that and been very angry at anyone who disagreed.
The indoctrination was strong.
Incredibly strong. And I learned that watching MSNBC. So it was not, Fox News made you a Republican. MSNBC made me a Republican. By the way.
Right.
So just for anyone out
Both
there.
Both sides are warmongers.
Both sides are warmongers. Exactly. And so I sort of then slid into anarchy over time, challenging my own beliefs and being challenged in my own beliefs. But I still am very much a political news junkie. Now I watch it the same way I'd watch Game of Thrones or something like that. It's almost like Game of Thrones, but they can actually hurt you. So I don't know. Do you still follow like political news, electoral, who's won the election of this or that or anything like that?
In my like for locally, and also nationally, like I was following the presidential campaign between Trump and Hillary. Like,
right.
I was curious, like, because it brings out, the philosophy in people. I mean, like, sorry, that's an inanimate object. I mean, like, people, because they're so emotionally invested in who they want to win, they're gonna like write online what their beliefs are. Right. So I enjoy analyzing like what people are believing out there, and sometimes I feel scared.
It can be very scary to see what the majority of people, the vast majority of people, actually think. Right. And realizing these are just normal people. These are what your friends probably, or some of your friends and family
like
probably
coworkers,
think too.
Or like,
exactly.
You don't talk about it. And there's that whole cliche of like, oh, who's gonna bring up a political topic at Thanksgiving? Like people are averse to it, but right, me too. But it's like but everyone has beliefs. It's just most people don't have philosophies, and they don't communicate non-violently. So that's why debates will usually devolve into like name calling, ad homs, be very emotional. They're not vulnerable either. People aren't being like really honest about what they believe. And so
they fight themselves into corners. One of the most freeing things was when I was having an argument with someone, and this was as an anarchist, and they made a point that I didn't, or they said something that I didn't have an answer to, I wasn't aware of, or something like that. And it wasn't even something that would cause me to cede my whole argument. And I said, yeah, you know what? I don't really know about that, or that's, fair enough, or whatever I said. And that was so freeing. That's like, you don't have to be, this isn't a fencing match where someone's counting points. Like, it's okay. You can say, you know what? That was a good point. And that has been it was like such a weight off my chest. So
that honesty, the ability to be honest and authentic. Yeah, it was freeing too. I mean, I had a childhood where I had to suppress my honest feelings or thoughts. So I grew up, lying, like learning that lying is okay in certain times, or I accepted it. But, when I was finally able to be honest with myself and what I really thought, and no longer lying and saying, oh, I don't really believe that, or, oh, it's okay that I do, it was really freeing. Finding virtue was really freeing.
Yeah, it is very
freeing. And
freeing.
Philosophy.
Yeah. One of the things that I am honest with myself about is that I'm very much a troll. And I try not to be, but I'm a troll even in real life. And one of the things is, so for example, in this last, I brought up political news.
I will say, hold on.
No, go ahead.
You brought up political news, but Jack did mention, I was like, oh, so what's Spike like? He's like, oh, he's like really chill, laid back, and he's a jokester. So I said that.
Yes. I'm a
That's
living troll.
not the same as troll, but you know,
I'm
I
a
like
troll
it
with a
still,
heart,
so.
right? Like a troll with a heart of gold. So for example, I don't know if you had followed it. There was an election earlier this week, or I guess last week, whatever. The runoff election for the Mississippi Senate, and the people that were running was a lady named Cindy Hyde Pierce, who was the Republican, and Mike Espy, who was the Democrat. Mike Espy is a black progressive. Obama came down to campaign for him. Oprah went, like, he was going to be the next Obama in Tennessee, basically. And Cindy Hyde Smith has made comments about public hangings and made veiled references to that, certain black people should be kept from voting. So it was very much like a,
Gosh, you
yeah,
gotta
yeah,
mix
yeah.
them.
Yeah,
Ugh,
it was a very
nastiness on both sides.
yeah, it was a real, like, true Dixiecrat, pre-Civil War era throwback versus this
Wow.
black progressive hope and change candidate.
Socialist too.
Yeah, exactly. And so, well, they're both socialists in their own special way.
Right.
But yeah, so you had this like hardcore old guard socialist versus the new friendlier socialist, and Cindy won because it's Mississippi and she's a Republican, and I find myself looking for whenever someone's side loses, I reach out to them and make my shoulder available for them, and I gently ask them to explain to me their vaunted democratic system and how wonderful it is. Do you find yourself doing that? That, like, at people's, and this probably is not a good example of being a peaceful person in the world, but do you ever find yourself when people who, they say how wonderful and sacred this system is, whether they call it a democracy or a republic or whatever they use to refer to it, this vaunted system, when they're like just lost brutally in something that, emotionally, do you ever find yourself like saying, okay, now tell me about that wonderful system again and how great it is and how we should respect it and should die if we try to not be a part of it?
I've had that thought. I haven't really acted on it. I consciously tried to focus on being empathetic.
So you're a better person than me, basically.
No. I mean, yeah.
No, absolutely. Hey, look,
I'm just more consciously focused on empathy because
it was, which is probably the better way to do it.
It's hard to do that on the internet sometimes. Like sometimes if someone's just throwing an ad hom, or just like, misinterprets what I said and like straw mans my arguments. Like I just said an argument because I don't have time.
It's hard.
But in person, like with family, friends, or just strangers that I meet, in libertarian circles or whatever, like, I'm more in the Socratic questioning mindset and empathy and just trying to help draw out the things that they believe in,
right,
and then trying to help them apply what the principles they have to other areas where they're not applying it consistently. And yeah,
so that's so I have some self work to do because I in general consider
we
myself
all
pretty,
do. Don't worry.
I know.
Yeah, I still do. Gosh.
I consider myself empathetic, but there were some friends that I hung out with them and I said, hey, how about that democratic process, huh? And I mean, this was like hours.
It's funny though. I like, that's a way. It's humorously bringing it up.
Yeah. So they didn't find it humorous, but fair enough. I was because
they felt defensive, probably.
They were very defensive, and I did the same thing when DeSantis beat Gillum. Pretty much a similar thing where you have someone who.
I followed that actually.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that one.
I learned that Gillum was like the most, like, he was so socialist. He agreed with Bernie on universal basic income. He wanted to mandate a $15 minimum wage in Florida, where the cost of living is really low compared to other states. Because
they don't have South Carolina has one of the lowest costs. It's part of why I still live here. It has one of the lowest costs of living. I probably have the lowest tax burden of just about any American. I'm in an unincorporated part of the lowest.
There you go. Yeah,
of the unincorporated part of the lowest taxed county in one of the lowest taxed states, and I also have a corporation to shield my income. So I'm like I'm as small of a tax burden as possible, which is why I'm here. And if someone like a Gillum, were running for office here, man, I'd be tempted to vote against him. That would be tempting, but I had a lot of fun when he lost. And in my defense, if he had won, I would have been doing the same thing to the DeSantis supporters, saying like, How about that constitutional republic, huh? So yeah.
Right.
Um, I,
Yeah.
one,
Well, for sure. I mean, DeSantis had his own statism. Like he said in one of his speeches, he was just like, "Oh yeah, I believe in medical marijuana and I'll help for that, but not recreational because I really want to keep our kids away from drugs."
which is
I
what
was
that,
like,
yeah, the drugs that they do anytime they want. Yeah.
right. And so I don't know. I wonder if the big pharmaceutical companies, because there's a huge one, and like there's a lot of cronyism with pharmaceuticals in Florida.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, all around the country, but Florida especially.
But what
You
there
know,
also is, there is a growing medical marijuana industry. So now they have a lobby who is, I guess, trying to get their foot into the door with the medical marijuana stuff. So it's interesting. It's like, okay, well, we can lobby too now. If we're allowed this much legality, we can actually create a lobby now. So it's
yeah.
really,
So I
it's it.
wonder who was lining his pockets, helping his campaign
Oh,
when
of
he'd be
course, of
against.
course, of
But he was
course.
very pro Second Amendment. So that was the main thing I liked him for. And Gillum was, completely anti Second Amendment. He was like, stand your ground is wrong. He wanted to repeal stand your ground. He wanted to limit magazine, capacities. He wanted to ban quote unquote assault rifles. So he's
Assault
all in that,
rifles, right?
camp of
Oh, he was a down the line, every hardcore progressive, talking point he did. So, but yeah,
yeah,
no,
exactly.
I had fun with the supporters and Stacey Abrams supporters in Georgia. I had a lot of fun this cycle. I'll say for me personally, I had a lot of fun
That's
and
good.
would have had fun regardless who won. So, how important do you find identity to be? In giving your message, like you are obviously breaking a lot of the quote unquote stereotypes around who might be a libertarian or an ANCAP. The stereotype is like more of like a me, like a
Nerdy white male or
yeah,
something.
nerdy white
Oh,
male,
not saying that
dirty.
you.
I'm a total
Okay,
nerd.
well, you
I
kind of fit the
embrace it.
stereotype.
Nerd life till I
You're
die.
Jewish, you got glasses on. I don't know. You're a T type.
I am
You're a logical
the
thinker.
prototypical, what you would, if someone met me and read my things, they'd say, you invested in Bitcoin, didn't you? So you break a lot of those molds and stereotypes. How important do you think, obviously your identity isn't who you are in terms of your thoughts and things, but how important do you think that is in terms of breaking those molds and those narratives about, well, that's just that's just a privileged white person's ideology, that you're female, that you're Asian, that you are the child of immigrants, and those types of things. How important do you think that is, if at all?
Well, I guess I could wrap it under the umbrella of any falsehoods are important to debunk. So if it's a falsehood, then yeah, I love debunking it. I mean, I've had people say, "Oh, she's just trying to get attention from all the white guy libertarians." Like, I've had people say that, or "Oh, she's only talking about guns. She must be funded by the NRA." It's just like that's not an argument, but
because
it's
because
yeah.
white libertarian males are the cream of the crop in terms of what you're looking for in a. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, they are though.
Thank you.
Well, not all.
Not all.
Just because I'll say this again, just because you're libertarian or voluntarist or anarchist doesn't mean you have your shit together, doesn't mean you have self knowledge,
Right.
doesn't mean you're a nonviolent communicator or
Does
even a
not.
peaceful parent. So,
Right.
but if you have that foundation of, wanting people's consent to be respected and you believe in self ownership, that's a
Right.
good basis for more virtue.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And yeah, so, and then so once you have the virtue, that's like a really good candidate, but only if you
That's a good point.
yourself is someone who's virtuous.
Okay. Well, I'm
If
being
I
too
was
hard on
like,
myself then.
yeah, if I was like some feminist who just cares about having some, man to come in and be assertive with me, but has no virtue and cheats on me and will be in a polyamorous relationship. Well, yeah, I'm not gonna look for a libertarian who's
Who does that? Right.
curious about the world, curious about the truth, and is trying to be consistent ethically and logically. Like, I would just
Right.
be repulsed by someone who challenged my worldview. But as someone who, craves conversations that are philosophical, there are a lot of libertarian men that are attractive and
That's a good
women.
point. Yeah.
I'm
Right.
not gay. I'm not gay. I'm just saying, I think that love is like Stefan Molyneux said this, and I agree. Love is an involuntary response to virtue if you are virtuous. So, as somebody who values honesty, courage, monogamy, philosophy, logic, reason, like I can't help but feel attracted to somebody who is as well, girl or guy.
Right.
And of course, I'm only romantically interested if it's, a dude, because I'm not
Because you're
gay.
not gay. That's
But yeah.
we've covered that. That's fine.
But yeah, so focus on virtue, and I don't know if you're married or something or
Yeah, I'm
have a
married.
girlfriend.
I'm married.
Oh, okay, well there you go. Hopefully you
did
found
agree.
somebody who loves you for your virtue and your desire for the truth,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
of course thinks you're a little cute as well.
I hope so. I hope she thinks I'm cute. I try my best. I'm trying my best here. So, I do what I can. At this point, we're 11 years in a relationship, 8 years in married. If she doesn't like how I look at this point, then thank you. If she doesn't like how I look now, there's not a whole lot I can do about it. I can do another haircut or something, but that's about it. So,
Another haircut.
yeah.
You guys have plans for children
maybe,
someday? Okay.
maybe, possibly. We might possibly.
Well, make sure you pick up nonviolent communication at the very least.
Well, and that's the thing. So when I read about this, I'm like, this is how I would want to raise a child. So yeah. But so a big powerful thing that you can do with your identity, which you really have you have no control over your ethnicity, you have no control over your race or your
yeah. But it kind of works out that I am able to help break some stereotypes.
It allows you to break those stereotypes, so that's really good, and you've done an amazing job at it. And like I said, 3/4.
Sometimes I go along with the stereotypes, like I say yes, freeze, but I'm just playing around.
I have the triple parentheses as my logo. I've taken the muddied waters of freedom and added the alt-right echo. So I am all about embracing stereotypes and narratives to get my point across. Yeah. So my badge for the show says "Listen to the Jew" and has a lot of Illuminati iconography there. I'm embracing the whole thing, and if that gets in some viewers, then great. 3/4 of why I had you on was because I think you're a really cool person. I was really looking forward to talking with you about stuff, and maybe not quite a quarter, about a fifth of it was like, well, how did you do it? How did you get popular? So I was happy to find that stuff out. So
I think honestly, part of it is, I don't know. A part of it is I am different. Like,
of course.
I'm not another white guy making content. I mean, maybe that's part of the job. Who knows? There's more to that, but maybe some of it is I'm a girl.
Oh, I'm sure some of it is. But honestly, there are plenty of girls out there that are pushing libertarian content. You have to have some
there's more to
merit
it.
there. Like, you have to have some merit there.
You need to have branding. You need to have good content for sure.
Yeah. If you don't have good marketing, good content, things like that, you can't just show up and be like, "Hey, I'm a black guy and taxation is theft," and
and you get like a bunch of subscribers. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It doesn't work that way, right? So so thank you again for coming on. I'm so happy to have had you on. I'm going to give you the floor before we go. Any final thoughts you have? Anything you want to plug? Any events that you have coming up? Whatever you want to talk about, the floor is yours. Yes, please.
Okay, let me just grab this book that I find very important. I show them nonviolent communication, but I always bring this up. I'm just over at my bookshelf.
That's fine.
Where is it? Okay. Oh, here it is. Cool. So it's this book, and anyone who's followed me for a while knows that I love bringing these books up. So, okay. Philosophy is important, yes, but the first step to, just discerning the reality of the world is to know yourself. That's like the first reality you need to understand is your internal reality. And so I highly recommend checking out Healing the Child Within by Charles L. Whitfield. This was the first book I read that was just really monumental in helping me to articulate the traumas that I endured and the core issues. You can see I even have it bookmarked. I don't know if you see it. Core issues from childhood.
Yeah.
That helped me to understand like some of the things that I've developed, like all or nothing thinking or behavior, fear of abandonment, neglecting my needs, desire for control. That's a really big one for statists and just everyone in general. And yeah, so it's like really good. And this will help
Healing the
to,
child within.
yeah, and it will help to,
I'll find a link to that like on Amazon or something. I'll put that in the show notes as well.
okay. Oh, I have some links. It's actually, so it is on the philosopher.com.
Oh,
So
okay.
the
Well then, okay,
homepage.
okay, perfect.
Yeah, on the homepage, you'll see there's a link to this and also nonviolent
Oh,
communication.
perfect. Okay.
They talk about it so much. And then this one is just more focused on like the methodology for communicating. How do you focus on objectively talking about your observations, being honest and vulnerable with your feelings and what you're experiencing, and then requesting what you would like to change in order to have your needs met in a way, that's not shaming. So these are really important for understanding yourself, forming a better relationship with yourself, because I believe that the way people treat others is usually a reflection of how they treat themselves in their minds. Like, you'll hear someone say, well, not hear someone say, sorry. Someone will say in their head, usually like, oh, I'm a fucking idiot. I did this. Like, I can't
Right,
believe I
right,
was
right.
so stupid. Just those little things that you say to yourself in your head has a big impact on how you view the world and how you view others, in turn. So, anyway, I really recommend people, anyone, just starting that journey of self knowledge, and I'll make a video eventually about what that entails.
Yeah, I'm
Like,
really looking forward to that. That'll be good.
yeah, but I can say here, like, basically,
This could be
self
your
knowledge.
video.
Yeah, take a sip. Philosopher, also local Jew, like, that's a good,
Also,
you
local
know,
Jew. Yeah.
I won't trigger anyone. They'll help to really understand what I'm saying. But yeah, so starting that, finding people who are like someone you can confide in. And if you don't have friends and family that you can confide in, like I didn't at the time, finding a therapist or a counselor who, you'll pay to listen to you. But
Right.
it's really important to have someone who can empathize and validate your experiences. So just starting that journey and trying to heal your relationships as well. And well, first of all, heal yourself, and forming relationships with other people who are virtuous, and developing virtues first and foremost, like focusing on being honest, focusing on clearing out your biases, and even understanding what biases you have now in order to change them. So yeah, so I will say that, and also keep an eye out, I think, for the huge push against dismantling the right to bear arms, or just to defend yourself however way
Yeah.
you want, and which is an attack on private property rights,
Right. Right.
fundamentally, because no one should dictate what you can or can't own when you haven't been violent at all to anybody.
Right.
Because that's a huge push that's happening, and yes, there are other statist things that are happening, but I believe
That's a
that,
big one. Yeah.
yeah, having weapons to defend yourself from criminals, whether they're in the state or outside, is so important. Like,
Yeah.
just to be, so that you can live, so you can stay alive. Like, it's just kind of funny I have to say that, but there's a huge push for it, as there has been for the last like 50, 60 years.
Right.
But just to like stay vigilant, and build a community too. Like, find other like-minded people, look for local meetups, look for online communities where you can find fellow liberty lovers and truth seekers, and like start to build it that way. So
And actually
yeah.
meet them and talk to them and go outside.
Yeah.
Go outside occasionally and meet people.
I have to remind myself sometimes.
It's
It's
like,
hard
it's
when,
okay to go outside. Yeah.
yeah, it's hard when you know, a lot of volunteers are scattered around. But anyway, so do that, and then also part of self-knowledge is forming empathy. Like, have develop an empathy for yourself first and foremost, and anything you went through, um, and thus you can translate to others, because that's what I believe voluntarism is about. It's having the empathy to, you know, say that you don't want this violence to happen to other human beings, and you recognize other human beings are like you too, in that they don't want their consent violated either.
Right.
And I think that's what will help us to communicate and spread the culture of voluntarism is with empathy. We live by example. We show that, I'm in a, monogamous relationship. I'm a peaceful parent. I solve, disputes with communication, not violence.
Right.
I know myself. I'm humble. I'm honest. I'm trustworthy. And you can inspire other people to be like that too. And also, if you're empathetic with them, you don't shame them. Like that will help to lower their walls with you and
Right.
to see you as a human being and humanize the voluntarist and libertarian movement. So yeah,
especially since it's what we're saying is so outside of any kind of, Tom Woods calls it the 3x5 card of allowable opinion, or some people call it the Overton window. What we're saying is so far, it sounds like, I told someone, they said, sum up your political beliefs in 3 words. And I said, legalize recreational plutonium. And
such a troll. Okay,
I know. That's what I'm saying. I
thought of something else. I was like, no, empathy is like
no. It was plutonium. But so we're so outside of it. That probably wasn't the best thing for me to say. But we're so outside of that. Paradigm of what people believe.
Right.
If you don't come off as like a person that someone even wants to be around, they're definitely not going to want to hear anything you have to say.
It's going to be more alienated and be like, I even more don't want to.
You're going to be like, I definitely don't want ideas. That. Exactly. So I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work on that a little. But I do my best. So check, guys. Again, thank you so much for coming on, guys. Check out the Pholosopher on Facebook, on YouTube, on the Muddy Waters of Freedom, My Fellow Americans. She'll be on there in a minute. And check her out on Patreon. We'll put the link to her Patreon there. Check out those books she just said, Healing the Child Within and Nonviolent Communication.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I got it. And the links to that are on her website, which we'll have the link to that on there. She's not gay. So it's
oh my gosh, I love that.
So we covered that as well.
Oh no, that might encourage more DMs. Oh well.
It's engagement. You gotta raise your engagement, right? You have to raise.
Maybe that was the other thing I should have mentioned. Mention that you're, like what sex you're attracted to.
Interested in women, but I'm married, ladies. But I mean, technically. So So increase your engagement by letting people know that you're not gay. That's our parting thoughts from this seminal moment in this show. So guys, thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Ms. Philosopher, for joining us. And guys, check us out.
For having me.
Yeah, thank you. And check us out next week for the Muddy Waters of Freedom, where Matt Wright and I will be parsing the week's news and explaining in hopefully a slightly less trollish way than I have been how that affects us and how the libertarian philosophy plays into that. Check us out again next week on My Fellow Americans. I don't remember at the moment who my guest is, but I can guarantee you it's a good one. And thank you again for joining us, and God bless you.
Put an ease to the minds like mine. Some sometimes darkness is all I find. You know what they say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny I would cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside, bullet holes in the body that was alive. Now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to all